Hey everybody, we are back. It is Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live podcast. You can find me, Jack Murphy, on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live, jackmurphylive.com, Jack Murphy Live all over the internet. Today we have a very special returning guest for I'm not going to call it an emergency podcast, but certainly a very timely one and one that we want to get to right away. This is Jordan Hall, and if you haven't listened to the other two podcasts that we've done earlier, please make sure you get those for some background and some context. Jordan, how you doing, man? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. You have to say you actually look quite healthy. For those of you don't know, I can actually see him. It's not audio only for me. Fortunately, you guys don't have to look at me.
Yeah, well, we didn't have the makeup crew tonight, so we're going all audio. I appreciate that, Jordan. Trying to stay fit, although I have eaten, I think, at least 2 weeks of my 2-month food supply in a matter of 2 days here. So
it's pretty funny, isn't it?
It sure is. All the granola bars are gone already. I don't know what we're going to do, but I'm really happy to have you on, Jordan. You're a big-time thinker. You understand the world in a way that very few people do. And I know that this event right now works very well in with your general thesis about the state of the world. And I read your situational assessment that you published. I put that out on my Twitter feed. Everybody, please read that. And I know that if you're using the word situational assessment, it is serious time. Those are your big pieces. So I'd like to pretty much just sort of open up the floor to you, Jordan. What have you been thinking about? What's been going on? What have you been doing? Where are we?
Well, it's interesting you point that out because, to be honest, I thought I was retired from writing things down. And it's kind of like the very first one where I was just finding myself spending a lot of time giving people more or less what's in that particular piece.
Right.
And so I figured I might as well just write it down and share it because it seemed like it was, frankly, it's going to save me some effort. But
yeah, that's
which is honestly the best stuff because that means that's you're doing something that people care about.
Definitely. I'm sure you've been in high demand in the last week or two. Everybody wants to hear what you're thinking about this because you've really been able to put together a framework that a lot of people have found a tremendous amount of value in. So I'm excited to see sort of cautiously how this fits into everything.
Yeah, so the question of what I've been up to, I think actually taps pretty heavily into maybe the key thesis. I mean, more or less, let's see, when did this start ramping? It's hard for me to even recall. I got in the RV and headed out here, about 2.5 weeks ago, maybe 3.
Okay.
Time is compressed, but
it really is. It's going by very quickly.
It's coordination, right? It's coordination. It's playing a node, playing my role in this large distributed cognition network that's in the process of waking up to both its capacity and quite likely its necessity in the context of what I'm calling just the meta crisis. I'm stealing Thomas Bjorkman's term to just say that's what we're in. We've been in a meta crisis for a while, but now it's real sharp and real salient. And a big piece of it for me for the first 2 weeks was straight sense making. Well, what's happening here, and more importantly, what are the things that are going to begin to happen in the weeks and months ahead that we need to be aware of now because it's moving so quickly that our reaction times just aren't ready for it.
Right. And anybody that's looking at this thing with data, current data, it's actually stale data, and everything that you need to really know is like already happening somewhere else in the future. And we have to be thinking down the road because acting on today's data is not going to get us anywhere, is it?
No, it's a little bit like if you've only driven it like 35 miles an hour your whole life, and then all of a sudden somebody put an accelerator in the car and just floored it.
Yeah.
And so the instincts that you've developed for how to turn and how to dodge things in the road at 35, they kind of work at 36 and 37 and 38 and 39, but before you know it, you're going 50 and 70 and 80 and 90 and 120 and 150 if you've got a fancy car. And that can get very, very disorienting if you're still using 35-mile-an-hour reflexes.
Right.
And this thing is something that's happening fast, i.e. exponential fast. Maybe we can talk about that as a very specific thing, but it's also happening complex. And that's another problem I think that arises in trying to grasp how to deal with it. We're, in some sense, we're not really dealing with a virus. Or to put it another way, we're dealing with a metavirus of which a biological virus is just one aspect. That's probably a better way of thinking about it.
Very interesting way of thinking about it. Now, I said I didn't want to get too much into the background, but you've used the word sense making. I'm using this word quite a bit myself too. Maybe you could sort of put that into context for people. Sense making. What is that, and what do you mean that you're a node in a sense making network of an open cognition network? This is a very important concept for people.
That's nice. I remember why I like talking to you. You always make me explain things in a way that makes sense. There you go. Right. That's it. That's it. Exactly. We're doing it.
Yeah, we're
It's
doing it
just
exactly.
taking perception. So sense making is perceiving, right? So just listening and looking and hearing. And then, and by the way, as we've talked about, I think in the past, disciplining and training with your entire instrument. So using every aspect of your body and your mind to be able to really perceive what's going on in reality, and then be able to bring that together into something that, I mean, just the old, it makes sense. It hangs together. There's a way of grasping of presenting yourself in relationship with reality where you can then make good choices. I mean, it sounds a little bit, how do you say, abstract, but if you think about it in a very concrete notion of like when you're shooting a basketball, the way that you poise your body, you bring your elbow into the center of the center of your chest, you bring your wrist back, you balance the ball in your hand, like that's sense making. Let's bring your body into an affordance, into a position, so that then your action taking is a very fluid connection of what's happening, and it's that relationship to experience.
Right. Right. And the reason that we are having this crisis of sense making is because our old sense making tools are now obsolete, right? Those are the 35 miles an hour ones that we had before.
Yeah, and this kind of runs in two directions. We've got the ones that we have as individuals, just our own particular individual capabilities and faculties, and that, of course, varies quite widely. There are some people, Navy SEALs, for example, who are trained to operate at a lot faster than 35 miles an hour, and so when the world seems to speed up for everybody else, for them it starts to slow down.
Hmm.
And there's a handful of people for whom that's the case, but broadly speaking, the world that we are used to um, has been training us to operate using a certain style of thinking and using a certain style of collaboration that is, well, let's just put it this way, is appropriate for a slower time, a simpler
Right.
time, like
Right.
the 1970s.
Right.
and
Right.
then and then the flip side, this is actually equally important, is the institutions of sense making. Like
Yes.
Walter Cronkite. Let's just be very, very concrete. Walter Cronkite and the kind of mind that was listening to Walter Cronkite made plenty of sense in 1969
Yeah.
and does not make any sense at all in 2020.
No. And that's because we have 5 billion Walter Cronkites now, right? And they're all talking to us and we're all listening, right?
Well, that's a real part of it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the challenges, one of the upsides and the downsides. I mean, when the downside is there's noise everywhere. And a lot of that noise, by the way, is increasingly sophisticated, intentional disinfo noise.
Yeah. We're
A
going to
lot
get
of
to
it's
that.
just dumbasses saying things that they should just be silent about. But
I've experienced quite a bit of that on Twitter lately.
I think Twitter was designed for it.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the upside too.
Yep.
You and I are talking on that same exact network. So
Yep.
hopefully we'll do a better job than those guys we were just slurring on Twitter.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so we've been talking about these concepts for a while about how the world is now talking to itself, many to many instead of one to many. And the top down communication structures and information distribution networks of the past are gone. And now information's flying around everywhere. And that has pros and cons. And in this case, how do you see the pros working out? Like how is it working out for you personally? What's been happening? What are you seeing? How is it happening systematically for you right now to be a participant in this open source cognition network, of which you've had a hand in sort of formulating the concepts around, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's how do I say this right? The experience that I'm noticing is actually a little bit like, the heck would it be? Maybe imagine that you just had a crowd of people and music was beginning to be sung. We didn't quite know what the song was. I guess we're doing the jazz metaphor again, but now it's a much larger group of people.
Yeah.
And the trick is you've got a voice, which is to say you've got a particular piece of the music that's yours to sing. And imagine everybody in the crowd is sort of milling about, and you listen to the people around you, and you notice, okay, no, that's not move here, a little bit there. That's my part. I'm next to that person until finally it arranges itself from a crowd of people who are sort of trying to figure it out to acquire the sing in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Right.
That's the experience that I'm having, right? Getting on conversations, talking to people, trying to figure out, okay, what piece do I have? How can I help? Who can I nudge? Who's the right person for me to be talking about? In what order? What are we missing? Like all that, like really, really trying to get a handle on how do we actually use the possibility? How do we use the capability for literally anybody on the planet to have a conversation with anybody else on the planet in any combination, using audio, video, text, whatever, to go from noise to signal.
Right. And how do you think that that's playing out right now, generally speaking, with the, John Robb's telling me and everyone else that the answers and solutions to the Corona crisis are going to be crowdsourced, open sourced. It's part of the open source intelligence networks, open source cognition. Are you seeing that? What are you seeing? And then let's try to get into some specifics on the Corona stuff too.
There's some really powerful stuff here. So one of the real challenges of what I'd call the blue church, right? We talked about that a couple times ago.
Of course.
And that's just the old style way of making sense. Radio stations and newspapers and three increment on a dial, is that it's a very narrow band, right? They can only tell so much in an hour and a half long segment, and so they have to pick, of all the stories that they could tell, they have to pick the handful of stories they can tell, and it's kind of one size fits all, which really means one size fits more or less nobody. Now, I can't help it, but you might imagine that there was a time when both of us were quite young, when they were doing a really, really good job of trying to actually figure out what was the best stuff to say. And of course, over the past 40 years or so, the necessities of marketing has meant that they figured out how to tell the most compelling stuff to say, the most salient stuff, not the most relevant stuff, to use my friend John Vervaeke's very good terms.
Yeah.
But in this digital medium, it has infinite bandwidth. It's infinite, which means that I can get, in principle, exactly what I need to hear. One size fits you personally. Now, it's not easy just yet. And unfortunately, the guys who are supposed to be doing a good job, like Facebook and Twitter, have been doing an absolutely abysmal job. But the potential's still there, and I'm seeing it happen. So let's give you an example. I guess 2 days ago, I was in a conversation with a gentleman in my hometown, San Diego, or at least my previous domicile, the place where I pay rent, San Diego. And he was already well on his way to coordinating a hub for local people in San Diego, to be able to have access to the information resources they needed to be able to solve the various problems that people are running into. Things like, okay, what are the appropriate protocols in my home? What does self-quarantine actually mean? What can I and can I not do? Okay, here's that information. Well, what if I've got my elderly mother living with me? Okay, what if I want to put together a neighborhood group to support childcare, because I got 2 nurses who live on the street and their kids just came home from school and the hospitals need them, right? All of it. Just thinking, what are the problems we need to solve? Let's get some smart people working on it, hammer it down, and then share it so everybody gets it. And you can distribute it all the way to the edge. And by the way, you can make absolutely sure that there is somebody on your block who has it and can actually walk it over. Well, these days, not quite walk it over, maybe, but bring it over to the elderly lady who lives across the street to make sure she's taken care of. And it can all be done by self-organization. Right? There's nobody from the government who's coming in to say we're here to help you. That was a really important solution in 1947. These days, they're pretty much getting in the way, except for a rare few who are doing an exemplary job.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily limited to just that. I mean, there are people are. I just looked at an incredible website that takes the stuff that was being developed by Johns Hopkins, and then uses the actual data from Wuhan. So the real data that describes an overlay map of the number of reported cases and the number of what they call the actual cases. So the Chinese authorities went through and actually interviewed people and said, okay, tell me when your symptoms first started showing, right? And then they said, and then back projected that onto a chart. And so we've got this really nice map that shows, holy smokes, by the time we actually have a case diagnosed in the hospital, we've already got 1,000 cases that have actually got symptoms around an environment. And that was some of the structure they're showing. So this team, and maybe it's just one person, took that model, took the real-time data, built a bunch of software that could take all the inputs that were coming in from the world, built some algorithms to create some variances, projected it against the visualization platform of Johns Hopkins. This created an entirely new way of looking at it, where you can actually get a sense of a projected model of the number of actual cases in your environment, which is a very different thing. Um, and that's very powerful. It's a valuable resource to have available. Similarly, I just spent some time today working with a group of scientists and doctors who are have self-organized to curate the scientific literature and try to provide the most current, up-to-date, synthetic information to synthesize all the data that's being produced by all these people all over the world who are getting real-time information and bring it in and provide it as a resource to literally anybody who wants it. And again, that's at the end of the day, just people coordinating. And I think this is a thing that gets lost. We kind of name things, institutions, as if they're real. Like Johns Hopkins, I named it as if Johns Hopkins is a real place.
Right.
Sorry, it was, how do I say this? That it did stuff. Johns Hopkins doesn't do anything. Right? There's people at Johns Hopkins, which is a building or a place, a bunch of buildings, but the people who are doing it. And I think that's the insight. The insight is at the end of the day, it's always been people choosing to do stuff. And now what's happening is we're discovering is that the right people can work with other right people to do really good stuff, and they can do it fast, and they can do it, I want to say like the old-fashioned way, which is using their own sense making and making their own choices for what they think is exactly the most important thing for them to be focused on. And that becomes very powerful.
It seems to me that this is actually engaging far more intellectual power and capability than perhaps some of the older ways of doing things, So would this, in your mind, accelerate any potential solutions that we can find? Or are we creating dead ends or obstacles? Or how are we surfacing the right things out of this whole cacophony of information that's out there?
This is a real problem. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the internet as an example, because these things tend to go through very specific cycles, and we're like halfway through one of those cycles right now. And I imagine that as a consequence of this crisis, we'll move all the way through it, or at least part of the way. So back when the WWW, right, the World Wide Web portion of the internet first started,
Yeah.
there weren't that many websites, and so you could kind of know all of them, or all the ones that were relevant to you. You keep them in your head. You literally would, like back in the days, like when you knew your friend's phone numbers, you just know the URL and type the whole thing in. Literally www, right? But after not too long, there was just too many, so you couldn't. You had an information overload, and so Jerry Yang said, "Well, I'll go ahead and just start creating a taxonomy and categorize all the websites, and I will carefully go out and create bookmarks of linking to all of them, and I'll publish that as a website of its own." Right? Yahoo becomes an information repository to take care of the problem of information overload.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that, right? And so that's how we cycle through. And by the way, originally blogs were that kind of thing. A blog was a collection of websites that were curated to be around a particular topic. But then we had so many blogs that we needed some sort of other architecture to be able to capture the blogs. That's happening now. So what's happening now is that we have so many projects, for example, that are coming out in so many different dimensions that it's now become information overload. Instead of it's hard for me to find the resources I want because they're scarce. It's hard for me to find the resources that I need because they're too abundant. So we're going through a process right now of people seeing that and beginning to create structure, creating mechanisms to create taxonomies and tools to categorize and simplify. And by the way, to curate in increasingly scalable ways so that people can ultimately get what they need. And that's building out infrastructure. I think that's the phase, right? There's a process of like awareness. Just some people become aware of a possibility. Then there's a process of exploration. They just begin playing with it and learning in it, and they start working around. Then there's a process of skillfulness. That there's okay, I get how you do this, and they start working on it. Then there's emulation. Other people can learn very quickly from the skillful individuals who are doing something, and they begin doing it. Then there's the process of infrastructure. Okay, we've got something more or less hammered. Now we need to turn this into a layer, like something that is durable, that other people who come on top of it more or less get it for free, and they can then go through that process again from the beginning. Yeah, and this thing is tricky because there's so many dimensions to it. I have been spending a lot of time, this is fun, a lot of time trying to figure out if there's a way to generate a truly effective, legitimate alternate currency model.
Hmm.
And let me tell you why. So here's the way it works. Like here's like a case study. So I'm sitting with a group of people virtually, and we're trying to think through what are the various sensitive points, the points where important things can happen. Like if you get it right, it works out. If you get it wrong, it works out. It's quite bad. So what are the sensitive points that are coming down the pipe? Um, Second or third order consequences of the virus.
Yeah.
And pretty quickly, we're like, okay, this thing's going to either you quarantine or you don't. And either way, you're shutting down the economy. Right? If you quarantine, you're shutting it down because you tell everybody to go home. If you don't, you're shutting it down because everybody eventually goes home because they don't want to get sick. Whether
Right.
whether you're running Italy or you're running China, either way, you're shutting down the economy. And in particular, you're shutting down the aspects of the economy that involve people congregating, like bars and restaurants and musical venues and things like that. And a lot of the people, well, 70% of the population is living more or less paycheck to paycheck. And a sizable fraction of that group has about $1,000 cash in the bank or less, which means that if you shut down the economy and you've got people in particular who are in vocations that don't pay them paid leave for not being at work, you're going to have a sizable fraction of the population you just flat out run out of money in 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And this thing
Quickly.
could easily run that long. All right, well, that's a problem. If I've got 70 million people who literally just ran out of cash because we had to shut down the economy to deal with the virus issue, now I've got 70,000 people who are either choosing to, well, one, they're going to miss their rent and mortgage payments, but they may actually be running out of food and water and they can't afford to get it. So what do? Do they starve to death? Do they start stealing it from other people? What's that look like? Well, it's definitely not good unless we can figure out how to make it good. Now, it is an opportunity. So we were trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool approaches. And this is the idea is like, there's probably at this point 60,000 people who are thinking about this problem. Some just people off on their own thinking about it, some in groups that are congregating. And everybody there's got a unique perspective, and some have some very powerful ideas. Our particular team was looking at it saying, because I've got a background in the cryptocurrency space, one solution has been promoted from the top down, which is a perfectly fine solution. Mitt Romney came on, I think, supporting it today, was just send a check of $1,000 to every American family.
Yeah.
Just make that happen. And that could happen, and I think it'd be quite a good idea.
Yeah.
Although I think checks are probably a little bit obsolete since you can't actually go to the bank. But in any event, there's a way of solving it. Now, okay, but we've got extra bandwidth. There's folks who are thinking about that, and I don't need to worry about that. If they pull it off, great. Problem solved, move on to the next one. But if they drop the ball, we need to have a solution in place. We can't just hope that the government's going to figure it out. If they don't figure it out, somebody's got to figure it out. So one solution we've been looking at was a dusting off a white paper that I actually read back in like 2008, peer-to-peer mutual credit system. And
Okay.
we've literally been going through doing design, mathematical modeling, grabbing folks who actually have the technical skill set to build the underlying platform. Fortunately, because the cryptocurrency thing was such a big amount of time and energy and resources, there's actually a lot of good code out there. And it's looking pretty good. So it is entirely feasible that, what is this? End of April shows up, and for whatever reason, the government decided not to pull the trigger on $1,000 in people's pockets. And I could show up like Patton at the Battle of the Bulge and say, yep, we already got it figured out. Here's the solution, go. And that's what we should be doing.
Do you care to give some details on that? That sounds fascinating to me. Peer-to-peer mutual credit system.
I'm going to get real nerdy. It's going to waste a lot of time. Maybe we could do it in a different situation.
Okay, we'll do it a different time. We're talking about the financial effects, and I was wondering what you thought about the comparison on a number of different levels between
Wait,
this and.
damn it, you sucker me. I got to tell you now.
All right, do it.
I'm just going to tell you, I'm a little bit enthusiastic about it. All right, so here's the way it works. And I apologize for a lot of these things are abstract, but the basic idea is to actually take, in the context of money, we have a bunch of different things that money does. We have money as a unit of account, like it's $5. You have to be able to say like how many units of value is this particular object. We have as a medium of exchange, and we have a way of keeping track of accounting metric. And typically when we think about money, we think about it in terms of mostly a medium of exchange, right? You give me a loaf of bread, I give you 5 of these green pieces of paper, and you thank you, and you walk away, right? But you can also look at it in terms of an accounting ledger, which is to say that you give me the loaf of bread and I give you the IOU for that loaf of bread. And we could just say 5 units. So 5 units of value has now been transferred. I'm in the red 5 and you're in the green 5. Okay, so peer-to-peer mutual credit uses that concept. Everybody starts at 0. Just imagine. Now, the hard part here is actually there's some slightly less autistic than me people are going to have to figure out how to actually make other people feel really good about doing it. But in the context of crisis, it might happen. So you show up with this app. You get an app. And what the app does, it says, okay, who are all the people who you truly are truly friends with? And we may actually have to do it around Dunbar numbers for some really interesting, powerful reasons. So who's your first 150? And then what you do is you say, all right, just gut check. How much would you be willing to loan this person? No questions asked. Now, Jack Murphy, how much would I be willing to loan Jack? I would give you $150 if you asked for it. Sure.
Thank you.
I would give you $150. Bam. And I wouldn't worry about it. I know that you'd be good for that. Okay, that's what we're looking for. So in this app, you go and say, okay, Jack Murphy, $150. Pick some other Twitter person I might know. John Robb. Honestly, I'd give John Robb $5,000 without even thinking twice. That man is solid. Sorry. He's just, I've known him for a while. I've known him for like 7 years. That's the thing, right? I've known him for 7 years and we've been through some stuff. So obviously there's going to be a difference.
Right.
Okay, now, basically at the end of the day, the economy is people engaging in transactions with each other. The part that we care about, the part we're trying to solve. When I'm talking about investment capital, that's a completely different thing.
Right.
So if I go to the store now and I walk in and I say, hey, can I get a loaf of bread? There's pretty much 2 things that can happen. One thing is he looks at me and says, oh yeah, I know you. You're good for it. Put it on your tab. We're okay. All right, but now what happens is he gets 3 credits in the green and I get 3 credits in the red, but he can actually spend those 3 credits with somebody else or actually create a kind of a money that can move. But maybe he doesn't know me. So in this app, what happens is he gets to discover the people who he knows and gives credit to, who are in relationship with me or people who I know who have credit to. So let's say he knows you real well. And let's say, for example, you and he have a situation where he's willing to give you $1,000 line of credit and you're willing to give me $100 line of credit. Not the 150 I give you because you're a better judge of character. So I walk in, he doesn't see me, but the app surfaces the fact that, hey, Jack vouches for this guy to the tune of $100. It's like, all right, it's on Jack's tab, so I get the bread, and it goes on your tab, so I know I owe you 5, and you owe him 5, and it's all kept track of in the data infrastructure.
Got it.
That solves the problem. And at that point, we call N+1, like who I know, and then N+2, who they know, and N+3, who they know. By the time you get to about an N+4, and you don't, by the way, get full credit for that distance, the farther somebody away from you, just like the way your gut tells you. If I were to say, hey, Jack, I know you trust me, you give me $100. Would you give my buddy Mark here a loan? Like, would you be willing to give him money? I think he's a good guy. You might be willing to say, okay, on Jordan's, I'll give him 10. And just not 100, but I'll give him 10. So that kind of a construct, the math behind that and the computational structure to make it so you can actually do it fast and easy and keep track of it. And it's not hackable and you don't get like Fat Tony coming along and saying, hey, Jack, it'd be a good idea. I know you don't know me too well, but I think you really would feel good if you gave me 10,000, right? You got to be able to solve those problems and get people working through that. But this is the thing. We got a lot of smart people out there who've been looking at this kind of thing for a long time and asking all the hard questions. And so the ability to spin up a monetary system that could be dropped into local communities around the world and make it possible for old ladies to get bread is doable, right? And I'm not saying it needs to happen or it should happen or it's awesome, but I'm just saying that's the kind of thing that we're capable of right now. And it allows us to do little belts and suspenders. If the government mails everybody a check, and by the way, by the time that check lands, people still take that money. Great. And if they don't, then we got a backup plan. We don't necessarily have to go crazy.
Right. I mean, this sounds fascinating to me. And you're talking about Dunbar numbers and communities, private communities. Liminal order sounds like a great place to experiment with something like this. Liminal order being this thing that we've built, which is also not only a men's community dedicated to increasing our personal sovereignty and our independence and auto-regulation, but it's also become a very powerful sense-making apparatus and an intelligence network.
Yep.
And we have been, for the last 6 or 8 weeks, just pouring over every piece of information that we can find anywhere about Corona, and we've been way ahead of the game, and everybody in our group has been way ahead of the game. Everybody's been prepared. Nobody's been surprised by any of this.
Hallelujah.
And it's for real, right? It's been incredible because Jordan, we talked well before liminal order was ever created, and it's now 9 months old with 200 members all across the country, even across the world. And the guys are really feeling the power of the network right now because they're all at home safe and secure and stocked, and their loved ones are taken care of, and they're prepped, and they're ready, and they're totally unsurprised by everything that's going on. In fact, the Corona room we have is slowing down in traffic now because we've sort of figured out what we needed to do, and now the
Yep.
time is really just to sit back and sort of wait
Just
and
check
see
in every
what's going
once
to
in a while and
happen.
say, "Yep, curve's on the
Yeah.
curve we thought it was going to be on."
Right. And it is unfortunately on the curve that we thought it was going to be on. And sort of about that and the Wuhan data together and your own take on the virus itself. I'm curious to get your perception. I know that the number of reported cases are quite low, it seems. The number of reported deaths are quite low. And it takes some real thinking into the future to be able to act in the way that people are acting today. How much confidence do you have in the numbers that are coming out of China? How
Hmm.
much confidence do you have in, the actual lethality of the virus? Does it even matter? What is your take? I mean, obviously, you're moving ahead as if the virus in and of itself is actually a real, powerful, dangerous thing that we need to be concerned with, or is it? I mean, I'm not like a naysayer by any means, but I'm interested to hear your interpretation of the epidemiology and of the
Well, I'm
the
not the
virus in and
expert.
of itself.
Fortunately, I don't
Yeah,
have to be. There's a lot of folks who are a lot smarter than me. So I was just going to tell you what the people who I think are. Well, let me take a step back actually before we go there, because I think this the liminal order. Let me just.
sure.
So you're talking about sovereignty.
Hmm.
And that's crucial, right? In times like this, the ability to actually to kind of be the rock, and the water flows around you and you're there, and then you can see what's going on, right? You're not just not panicking, you're actually getting frosty as things get harder.
Hmm.
Um, that's what's needed, right? That's what's called for. That's what keeps things holding together. And as things get even hotter, it becomes more and more important. So the liminal order and the many other folks around the world who've kind of discovered the responsibility of that kind of a practice are actually playing a vital role in the way this thing plays out. And I'm going to come back to the question you asked. I just remembered this is
Sure.
a very important story to be telling here,
No,
and
go for it.
it was you know came through to me. Gosh, I think yesterday. Um, I actually shared it earlier today. So there's the United States and Germany, 1930s, Weimar Germany. Right? In both cases, you had a Great Depression. You had a financial crisis that blew the financial system up. You had a very powerful economic depression that put a whole lot of people out of work and with real privation, starvation, and bad. But in the United States, the fabric of community, the people who are able to say, no, no, this is not an us versus them story. This is a we story. And we're able to figure out how to deal with the problem and come together as a community was strong. And we had just a lot of community fabric back then. And they rose to the occasion. And it actually became stronger as a consequence. So, of course, we came out of the Great Depression into World War II and out of World War II as a very powerful nation at the base, like with footings, with a solid footing. Now, poor Germany had been handed a bad hand, right? World War One wreaked havoc to both their psychology and to their economy. They left the government that they were familiar with, the Kaiser, and were stuck with the Weimar Republic, which was well intentioned as it wanted to be, just didn't have a lot of legitimacy. And so that the depression, the financial crisis, and the economic crisis ripped right through the political institutions and hit the community institutions and blew through those as well. And you had a complete meltdown of the basic cultural fabric of
Mm.
Germany. And of course, that's how you get Nazi Germany. And the reverse of that is also you get Venezuela, right? It either goes towards radical authoritarianism or it goes towards chaos. And those are really bad results, right? I'm not saying this particular context is for sure going to have that order of magnitude. But nonetheless, I want to have the fabric of community strong enough to handle it if it is. And I want to be able to have the possibility of not just fortitude, not just standing, but actually getting stronger as it pushes against us. Anti-fragility is this. This is the thing. This is anti-fragility, right? It's
Yes.
individuals who have already made the commitment to choose how to take responsibility for how they're going to respond to what reality is throwing at them. building the skillfulness and discernment to perceive reality, even when A, it's complex and moving fast, and B, other people are intentionally trying to throw disinformation at them.
Mm.
And they still choose that the answer is we, not us versus them. And they start to build that community fabric around them, and they hold their, they hold their arms out and bring people under their protection, and then they weave together and look at each other and say, okay, we can take it. All right, that's the moral of the story. That's the beginning and the end of the whole thing. Now, shit, I forgot the question. What'd you ask?
Well, we were going to talk about financial crisis, but you wanted to come back and talk about community. And so I think you really nailed it in terms of the anti-fragility and the we factor, and just a commitment to engaging in this way with information in the world around us and the people that we have chosen to commune with. This is the strength that we have, and it's giving us power. And it's really been remarkable to see that everything was going very well. But this Corona thing has really brought us all
together. The virus,
together.
that was the question.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about the virus too. The Corona thing has really brought us all together. But we all are thinking about these major issues, and the financial crisis of 2008 or 9 was a hugely problematic event for the United States. And as you've told me before, the financial sector destroyed the economy, and the economy stripped mine down into civic society in many ways. Do we feel this is comparable? Are we facing similar risks? Are we facing?
It's bigger
because it's bigger than the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah,
okay, tell me how's this? Yeah, explain that.
Because they never solved the problem in the 2008 financial crisis. They just kicked that can down the road, and now the can came back and kicked us. So they're panicking in a big way, and we got a couple other things that are going on. Right, we got a big ass virus, and it's happening, and it's real enough. Like I don't need to sort of. It's not the flu. And it's not the Black Death, right? Somewhere in between. Right. And it seems pretty straightforward that if you sort of handle it with your head up, and you kind of look at it and say, hey, we're going to just make the right choices in the right pace, then you can mitigate the damage pretty well. And we've already seen a bunch of folks over in Asia make those choices, and it worked out. And if it looks like you are complacent or stupid, and by the way, a lot of 20-year-olds are stupid. And we've seen evidence that they're some of the bigger risk factors. They actually can get real bad. Right? We know the weak point, the sweet spot here, the sensitive point is the overwhelming of the emergency rooms. And once we, it's like a tidal wave. Once we get too many of those, once the cup is filled and now it's water flowing out on your shoes, now you actually are in real trouble, and the mortality rate skyrockets. And so you can look at Italy, where you've got like a 5% or a 7%, I think the last time I checked, which is a real big number. That's a lot of people. That's not a good thing. And by the way, it's no picnic for young people if you get it. This is not the kind of thing that you want to just kind of go out there and start licking doorknobs to see if you can, show off.
Which they're doing, actually.
Which they're doing, right? They're dumb, and hopefully choices suddenly have consequences again, which is a good thing from my perspective.
Definitely.
So it's real enough, right? But then you got the financial crisis, which is super real. Like, it's going to be a big question. And it's interesting because while they didn't really fix anything, they did actually get really good at dealing with fires. So they didn't decide to go ahead and not have fires, but they got really good at putting out fires. And boy, are they pulling out those tools these days. And boy, is the market not impressed. So
right. And by that, you mean like the Fed and repo actions and the Fed funds rate at 0 and
and
potential fiscal stimulus.
Exactly. The whole kit and caboodle. Things that back in 2008 they had to figure out, they had to invent. Now they could just kind of push buttons. Now they're noticing they're having to push the buttons really, really hard to have any effect, because you got to keep taking the smack if you want to keep having the feel. But
well, that's where it is. But carrying that analogy forward a little bit, you keep pushing the button, and eventually you're just dead.
Eventually, right? DOA.
Yeah,
that's true. So we've got that going for us. That's a real thing.
Are we doing anything? Is there anything contemplated currently that you think is anything beyond just pushing that button again? I mean, are we kicking the can down the road again if we just do a huge financial bailout and run at negative interest rates for the next 24 months?
All right, let's loop back to that. So I want to add a little bit more fuel to the fire and then come back to that, because I think there's a really nice pivot point there. So just to make some other difference between now and then. So we got a virus. We didn't have that then. We got China. Didn't have that then. Right. Back in 2008, China was sort of the up-and-comer. Now China's pretty solid bantamweight. This we're not talking about a 12-year-old kid anymore. And they're making moves right now. Right? They're not standing still. They're actually looking at this saying, Looks like the U.S. may actually be looking to give up some territory, and maybe we'll be happy to take it. And obviously, our friends in Russia and everywhere on the planet, unfortunately, we're in a situation where the kind of the moral, political, and sort of de facto obvious leadership of the United States is no longer so obvious. And everybody's kind of watching us to see if the old lion's lost a step. Um, and on top of that, back in 2008, coordinated action across central banks and governments was trivial. Everybody got on the phone and called each other. You know, ECB did this, the Japanese bank did this. These days, everybody's kind of waiting to see what's the right choice to make for themselves. And that's another difference. Another difference is we didn't have the crypto economy. And nobody was playing with the possibility of alternative monetary systems back then. Nowadays, they are, which means that we have a little bit of maybe some choice. You know, if there's a real issue of what's the flight to safety, and it looks like the dollar is maybe not as safe as we thought it was going to be, there's some other options out there. And there's people who might actually decide to build even still other options. So far, I have to say that I'm not particularly impressed with the creativity that's coming out of the top in terms of the financial crisis that's happening right now. Looks like they're just going down, they're pulling out the playbook. Now, the playbook has a few more rows on it. We've got that thing that got dubbed helicopter money, and I can see their finger hovering over that button right now. And they may, in fact, need to, and it may be the right thing to do, because Mitt Romney's $1,000 check to just make people have cash and helicopter money are kind of a match made in heaven. But, you know, the poison is the cure. That may solve a couple of problems. It may solve some pretty important problems, but it all creates a whole bunch of other problems downstream. So you're kicking the can down. It's not the road anymore, is it? You're kicking the can uphill, and it gets bigger each time. It's some kind of weird Sisyphean problem. But we don't necessarily have to take it so much anymore. You know, we don't necessarily have to be kind of sitting here looking up and saying, please don't fuck us again. And it's not a Tea Party issue either, because we can all talk to each other. We can all coordinate, and we can build stuff. And we can actually have the ability to actually choose to build stuff that we like, and maybe build some solutions that we'd prefer to see. And then we can actually show up and say, hey, you know what? I think maybe you ought to do B instead of A. And if you don't do B, we're going to kind of do B anyway and fuck off. And that's a very different place.
By we, you mean the people.
I mean the people.
Right.
And there's a lot of that going on, by the way. I'll give you an example. This is happening in real time. And I can't say that it's a little scary, because it's got some potential. So those aforementioned 70 million people are going to be in extremis in about 2 to 6 weeks. Well, one of the problems they're going to have is making rent. Well, one of the old solutions is the old-fashioned rent strike. 70 million people all at once say, fuck off, we're not paying rent. Then they probably get away with it. Now, there's a problem to that, because there's a lot of us versus them energy in that particular approach.
Right.
But there's also a possibility of there being hey, everybody, look, we don't want to go there. There's a lot of better ways of solving this problem. In fact, there's actually some pretty trivial ways of solving the problem. But if nobody's going to solve the problem, we're not going to be the ones who take a hit. We're going to solve the problem ourselves. And, you know, that's it. Here's the choice. It's no longer a choice of, how did it work back in 2008? It's like, tails you win, tails you lose, heads I win. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we're going to actually go ahead and have a fair coin. And we'll take our bets. And I think we can even go further than that. I think we can actually start engaging those people and say, you know what, I hear you and I see it and it makes sense. And let's actually build a better design. Let's all work together. There's no reason for us to actually even slow down or wait. We can solve these problems and then flip it around the way that it ought to be anyway, and put the politicians in the following seat. And there's stuff to be done. I mean, I'll give you an example. Utilities, cable. That's hard. I can't make the lights turn on. That's a serious problem. We can work a little bit on that. There's some solutions to it, but broadly speaking, we need the utility companies to continue to function and continue to give people electricity. So that's a little bit more of let's encourage our local mayors and governors to be able to be thinking clearly about what to do, and we can support them. This doesn't need to be conflict. We're all working together, and all the choice makers need to be supported in getting the information they need to make good choices. So you can imagine a crowdsourced program of real smart people who've got skin in the game. They want to make sure that the air conditioner works in the summer, and they come up with a proposal and a plan that's a lot better than what the poor mayor could figure out on his own, because there's got a lot of stuff going on. That's another example. But it's a new game. It's definitely a new game. This is not 2008. This is a different situation.
One of the ongoing themes here is sort of the retreat of the legitimacy of the federal state and the increase in the power of the people. This is on trend with that, you think? Talking to John Robb earlier about open source political insurgency, sanctuary cities and counties on left and the right, immigration and gun control, which
That's
is a
right.
fascinating thing. There does seem to just be a continuing erosion in the faith and confidence that people have in the federal government. And in our institutions, just in general, of course, media
Yeah.
and academia and everything. You see this as an event that is it interesting? Is it born out of this trend, or is it just yet another trend point on the path towards some sort of new organization? I mean, we're obviously in a period of transition here.
Choice
we don't
B.
know
You know
we
me.
don't know where
So
we're going. Yeah. So is this on trend or of the trend, or how does it fit into this whole
well, I mean, to
journey
be
we're
perfectly
on?
frank, from my point of view, we're about 2 years early, which is not a lot,
Uh,
but I was expecting this to be more in the 2022 to 2023 timeframe. It's the virus that precipitated. I mean, all the things that are going on were definitely baked in. But and pandemics are stochastic. It was for sure going to be the case. We were going to get a pandemic. This one's kind of like a little bit in the low middle of what we were, might be out there. And by the way, there's a bunch of nasty ones that are hanging around ready to go at any point. So we actually get we have to get extremely good at dealing with pandemics. It's just the future has to have that capacity. We just have to be a whole lot better at it. So this is a good learning opportunity. But my daughters bought these fancy, what are they called? So it's almost like a rubberized ice cube tray with really fancy ice cubes, diamonds and snowflakes and things like that. Lo and behold, you pour the water into the ice cube tray and put it in the freezer, and you get a snowflake. Right? The topology of the technological and socio-technological landscape that we happen to be operating in is like an ice cube tray. And if you happen to be in a socio-technical infrastructure that uses newspapers and televisions and um, like roads, like the interstate highways, a cutting edge technology, and aircraft travel is brand new, and you've got a certain number of people, that's an ice cube tray that when you pour the water and you come back out and you get the government that we're used to. That's what it looks like. We got a new ice cube tray. This ice cube tray, when
Interesting.
you pour the water and pull it back out, it looks like a network.
Interesting. Interesting. One of the themes that I've been hearing lately too is that the era, I've been pushing this one a little bit myself. I'm wondering your thoughts. The era of indiscriminate connection is ending. And by that, I mean, globalization, NATO expansion, social media out there, everybody reach, put everything out there, connect, connect, connect. And maybe now are we tipping towards where the smart money is on strategic disconnection? And I think that this is a theme that can be related both on a personal level with social media and your communities, all the way up to globalization and lack of trade barriers and capital flows and such. Do we have a trend reversal in the making here? And if so, is it wise? Is it unwise?
Well,
Or am I just, seeing things?
I think I agree with you that that old trend of indiscriminate connection is definitely DOA. That is on its way out. And what I'd say is, as with all things, there's a choice. It could be bad. It could be good. I would say that something like strategic disconnection feels a little bit angry. I might
Mm.
suggest something like discernment and right relationship.
Oh, there we go.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
And that's the possibility. You have to use discernment. You have to build the capacity to use discernment to sense what relationships are possible and what is the rightness of a given relationship. And that's what you're seeking. And wow, that's not bad. That's always good, right? What's the exact and it's always available. And the right relationship might mean turn around and walk away, but it doesn't mean you have to be angry about it. It just means that's the right thing right now.
Yeah. So part of this trend would be like onshoring some of our critical national defense industries, precision tooling, medical productions, things like that, so that we're committed mostly to taking care of ourselves, self-care,
Yeah.
rather than committed to this notion of indiscriminate connection,
Well,
which
take that
dominated the
trend
last 30 years.
all the way to its natural conclusion, right? It's ourselves, literally ourselves, our physical bodies as individuals,
Yeah.
and our minds, and our souls, and our relationships, and our families, and our neighborhoods, and our communities, and our towns, and our cities, and our nations, in that direction, in that order. Solid foundation.
How do we increase our discernment? Because discernment is the key element, it seems, in all of this, right? And have we been lacking generally, collectively, in discernment, our discernment capabilities?
Extraordinarily.
Is this extraordinarily so? So can you tell me why our discernment capabilities have been eroded? And then how do we individually, community, family, community, and at a nation level, increase our levels of discernment and then put that into practice, Jordan?
Well, first, again, let me say I will endeavor my level best to share something that's of value. There are people who are vastly better positioned than myself to respond to this question. Okay, so
modest.
I would like to call it just honest. Let's go with integrity first.
Okay.
And integrity is pretty simple. Like, think about when you're trying to build a wall with rocks or bricks. Does it have structural integrity? Right? Do you have a solid foundation, or things stacked one on top of the other in the right order and in balance? And that's integrity. In yourself, integrity is all of you connected, is all of you showing up, and is all of it in relationship with itself in a strong way. Again, poise is an aspect of that. Very similar. When I said again, I was thinking about my basketball player or a dancer or a boxer. We've talked about this actually. That sense of being poised. And that sense of having capacity to connect your present self and your future self with continuity. That your future self is in relationship to your present self in the same way that all the aspects of your present self are in relation. Continuity, integrity, continuing that. Sovereignty, right? The ability to maintain that in increasingly diverse and challenging contexts. This is like what keeps the instrument in tune. If you've got one of those old-fashioned TV antennas and the wind picks up the static, what was that called? The fuzz? What did we call it back then?
Yeah, the fuzz. Yeah.
I remember the static picks up. You can't see the picture anymore.
Yeah,
right?
crackles.
And we've got a very complicated antenna, right? So it's very easy to throw off. A lot of the things that get thrown off are on the inside. You get triggered. You get angry. You get judgmental. You think you know the right answer. You get self-righteous. You want to be right. You're ideological. You're afraid. A big part of sovereignty is being in relationship with that and being able to allow those things to come up, and yet at the same time, not have them become the thing that's happening in front of you. You don't want the interior of you to getting in front of your lenses. You want it to be behind and let reality come through you, and then let your interior process that and digest it and make it metabolize it. And there's a lot of things we don't want to perceive. And most of it is that kind of thing. So discernment is then first just becoming a clear instrument and being able to hold that clarity in as many possible contexts as you can. And then building your attunement, right? This is a real skill. One of the things that really, really, really has harmed us a lot is childhood education. When a kid is sitting there in first grade and everything around them is feeling quite wrong, their body feels like they should be doing something else. And they are required to not listen to the signals coming from their body and do something that is, in fact, I will tell you, objectively, obviously stupid. You are breaking their discernment. You're breaking it. You're not even bending it. You're just breaking it. And you're overcoding it into something else, right? You're turning a human being into some kind of a machine. And machines don't have very good discernment. They have good ability to repeat the same thing over and over again. If you're building that kind of an object, if you're trying to make a tool, then you're doing a good job. If you're trying to build a human being with discernment, you're doing quite a disservice. And it continues to build because it becomes a feedback loop, right? As you get out of connection with these signals, you can very easily get out of integrity, right? When you're divided against yourself, when one part of you definitely does not believe something, but another part of you needs it to happen, and you sort of repress parts of yourself in order to have other parts of yourself working out. And instead of mastering discernment, you master repression and self-delusion and self-bullshitting. And then you build it into an institutional structure where people make a whole lot of money by being really good at bringing other people out of integrity and giving them stuff they never needed in the first place. That's a pretty dysfunctional civilization. It's kind of the kind of thing that we've built. But the good news is the trend is reversed, and we're heading back in the direction of discernment.
Okay. How do you? I mean, we can take this tangent if you want. I'm interested in education, especially. I spent 10 years turning around some of the most underperforming charter schools in the District of Columbia. I'm fascinated by education, early childhood. And what you said really hit home, actually, that we're building tools, but in doing so, we're creating like a sense of oppression within them. And you wrapped up by saying that the trend is changing. I don't really know that it's changing in our school system or in early childhood, though,
No.
right? So, like these inputs that we're getting into our system, which to speak so callously of our children, but these inputs into our system, they're still coming with the flaws of the system that we have currently, right? So,
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
have you
You familiar with the idea of a trim tab?
the trim tab? I am
This is
not.
Bucky Fuller was talking about how when you take a look at a really, really big ship, and the rudder, it's huge, right? It's pulling huge amounts of water. You can't turn the rudder, so you don't. What you do is you actually turn a much, much smaller object all the way out of the end, which is called the trim tab, which
Got
changes
it.
the disposition of the rudder and then begins to change the fact that the rudder will more or less turn itself. So the trend is changing, but the trend is changing in what you might call the most subtle ways possible, like just in the liminal order. There's a few people out there, hundreds, right, not millions, who are beginning the process of grasping the reality of what is possible and what's necessary. But
Mm.
that begins things, and then the old system is just getting hammered, right? We got a big one going on right now. I just heard from my daughters that their school's looking to potentially simply be canceled for the rest of the school year.
Yeah.
So they're having to level up on how to engage in teleeducation. Well, this is a huge opportunity. It could be a terrible one. They could make a mess of it, but it could also be a really good one. And what's really powerful is these kids know a hell of a lot more about how to do things digitally than any of the teachers or any of the administrators. Like
For sure.
100 million times more. Like they are a powerful force, and they're a powerful force. Unlike our generation, which at least for me, at least, was raised on a personal computer that was one machine that you dealt with.
Yeah.
They're interacting network continuously as a native language. So to be perfectly frank, I would more or less ask them how to solve the problem, and then support them in doing it if you
Right.
wanted to go there. Now, education. So in terms of discernment, the baseline is actually extremely easy, and we do early childhood development's best. Let's talk like an actual infant. I'll give you a simple example, and this was taught to me by somebody who I deeply respect. When my daughter was born, my youngest daughter, who's now 16 and a half months, um, we did something different, something we did not do with the older ones, which was before anybody picked her up, you would put your hands out as an offer and would wait. And of course, when she's really, really small, you might wait a little while because she has no idea what you're doing to see if there's any obvious choice on her part. Did she feel
Hmm.
right with that? Grandma cannot come in and just grab you. If grandma wants to pick you up, first she lets you decide whether or not that's something you're into. And this isn't, I'm not trying to say that you're asking the child to make a choice. What you're trying to do is actually allow the child to have the time to get a sense of their own sense, right? Not throw them constantly, because the body has all kinds of things going on, and if you're constantly jerked around from one place to another and things keep happening, you can't make sense of it. So to go slow and listen, and then you listen. Like for me, like I don't know what a 6-week old or a 3-day old is trying to tell me in terms of whether they want to be picked up, but I'm going to take the time and force myself to actually build my own discernment. Discernment's a two-way street. It's always relational, always built in relationship. And lo
Yeah.
and behold, my daughter very quickly learned how to very trust her own instincts, unlike the poor first grader who was told not to trust her instincts. And she gave very clear signals. Quite often, she had no interest in a particular individual. And that's just the way it was. You know what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to override her sovereign choice not to be in a relationship with this particular individual. It's certainly not necessary. Um, and she's gotten quite good at it. Here's the interesting thing: human beings are actually naturally very, very good at this skill. And if you allow them to have the space and the quiet, and don't put devices in front of them,
Mm.
don't jam their you don't overload their sensorium with things they're not prepared for. Um, keep the home environment pretty quiet. Children will begin to fill those holes, and then all you got to do is listen really closely and support them. And then you bring the opportunities. You ask questions. You put them in context where they have the opportunity to discover epiphany, and then become aware of what epiphany feels like.
Mm.
And this is maybe the last piece on this. Remember we talked about how in the age of broadcast television, they had to sort of do one size fits nobody. And education's kind of had to do the same thing,
Yeah.
right? Particularly when teachers got radically disempowered and just had to kind of teach to the program. One gigantic, huge, and completely maladjusted curriculum that maybe works for 8 kids in the entire country.
Right.
Well, now is we don't have to do that. In principle, you could create a absolutely bespoke learning environment for every single individual. In principle, we absolutely, as a civilization, could do it from birth. In fact, before birth, at the moment of conception, you can begin the process of dealing with that individual as a singular event in the universe and giving them the resources they need to become precisely who they're capable of becoming. This is absolutely possible right now in the civilization that we live in. And the returns on that are infinite. Well,
Yeah.
no, in fact, they're actually infinite in the true meaning of the term.
Right. Uh, what's interesting is the school system seems to be trying to solve for scale, right? Like we have so many people, so we have to, put the most basic thing out there to try to hit the common denominator, right? The most common denominator for people. And you're saying effectively we're not hitting that at all. It's interesting to me. This fits with my general, trend thesis about indiscriminate connectivity and sort of a
Yeah.
selective disengagement. Is that we no longer need, as you're saying, to engage in that one size fits nobody system that you were talking about, which is really about maximizing connectivity across the country in the frame of the federal government and their ideas for education. And now you're talking about creating a bespoke learning environment that is really only possible because of the technology and the information systems that we have today, right? So it's an interesting way that the technology has led us at first to be out there everywhere with everybody, but now can lead us into smaller, completely individualized, customized experiences for people from conception, as you say, Jordan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very powerful, and I mean this in quite seriously, because if you think about it, you kind of ask the question, well, how could you pull that off? That's a lot of time. It is, and the
Yeah,
only people who are going to be able to pull it off are parents. All right, well, to make this thing work, you're going to have to actually create space for parents to do their job, which is to parent, and you're going to have to empower the parents to actually be parents. But we can do it. I know firsthand. You can do it, and the resources are available, and we have the capacity. And you've done this, right? As soon as somebody chooses to start taking responsibility for themselves, the possibilities that live within them are enormous.
indeed. Indeed, I feel like this opportunity, I just said opportunity, not crisis. This crisis is creating a million opportunities. We're about to see what it's like when the entire country is homeschooling, first of all, right? And
Yeah,
basically everybody is at home with their kids during the day, five days a week, at least for a couple weeks. It could even be a lot longer than that.
yeah,
Some places have already closed schools till the end of April.
yep.
So I can't see schools opening up early compared to other schools. So this is an interesting disruption that has created an opportunity and an experience, a collective experience that we have not ever had. Has there ever been a time where virtually every child is at home with their parents for extended time where they're ordinarily supposed to be at school?
Well, I
It's
mean,
like
the
summer,
totality
you
of
have,
human
you have
civilization
plans.
up until the 20th century, but not in our lived
Right.
environment. No.
Right, exactly. What other we talked about another opportunity you said coming out of this, which would be like looking at new peer-to-peer mutual credit systems, other financial solutions. We're seeing now there could be an opportunity for new education systems, or at least a new perspective, or at least having the door cracked open into parents' minds that, hey, maybe when I see I can homeschool my kid in 90 minutes and they learn more than they were there all day long, and we have all this other time to do all this other stuff, this is going to creep into people's mindsets, and it could lead to long-term changes. And I feel like I'm seeing it already just in terms of people's attitudes towards homeschooling. Do you see any other opportunities, trend changes that are coming out of this crisis/opportunity that we may not have talked about yet?
It occurs to me there's probably a really good Greek word. Let me give me a second here.
All right, we're Googling things now.
All right, it's called Kairos.
There you
We're going to
go.
use the word Kairos. It's neither a crisis nor an opportunity. It is a Kairos. And this term is from Greece. Sorry, I lost the tab, so I'm just trying to find you again. I got so many tabs open now. I've never had so many tabs open. I'm wondering my computer hasn't blown up. This is a moment, right? A Kairos is a moment. It's a moment where everything is rich with possibility. And it's the moment where this was the epic Greek language where kingdoms are won and lost in a single toss of the dice. We are in a Kairos, and choice, our capacity to make effective choices, is the beginning and the end of it. So what kind of possibilities arise? Well, to be perfectly frank, we don't know yet, because the bigger the momentum, the bigger the possibility. I was using a metaphor to describe this earlier. So think about the world we've been living in is like a steel ball, and it's rolling on a table, and the table has a big groove in it. So the ball's rolling in the groove. It's just going to follow that groove. You want to move the ball out of the groove, you have to push it really hard. It kind of climbs up the side of the groove and drops back in. That's like trying to change the education system in the 80s and 90s. But Kairos makes the groove shallower and shallower and shallower. At a certain point, if the groove turns into a completely smooth surface, and you've got this big steel ball riding on a glass table with no groove at all, everything's possible. And that might happen as our capacity increases. Right? Remember, the possibility that lives right now in individual human beings stepping into their sovereignty, into their discernment, and then coming into right relationship with each other and using these new network technologies and information technology capabilities. The possibility space of that is possibly millions of times larger than the world that we've been living in. And I'm not kidding. Like the mathematical orders and orders of magnitude more possibility. We can't even conceive of it, the possibility that's available, that's latent, that's sitting unused right now. And so as the Kairos rises, our capabilities begin to build. And as the Kairos becomes more intense, our necessity, mother of invention, forces us to step out of bad habits and old habits and drop old institutions and things that have been holding us back. And maybe we don't make it, maybe we do. But if we do, we've stepped into more capacity. And at a certain point, that capacity begins to lift off. We actually begin to look around and say, wow, we are actually on the other side of something. We're in an entirely new place. And at this point, it becomes like a science fiction novel, or perhaps like a religious story. Because it's real, it's there. The possibility is quite simply there. Now, I don't know what the ending is. I don't know what we are truly capable of. But I know it's tremendous.
Right. And I know that one of your goals is to design for emergence, right? Like what we're working on right now is trying to create systems that will allow for these new ideas to bubble up to the surface. And it's a very interesting approach that you're taking, which is I don't have the answer, but I am working on a system that hopefully will at one point generate the quote unquote answer.
Is that right? That's right. Yeah, none of us have the answer. That's not how this game works.
Right. It's a decentralized agency, I think you were talking about as well, too. And I'm also thinking one thing I'm really struck by through all of this is you describe all these people putting together websites and curating. Curation is a huge topic we could get into as well. Creating all this new information, doing the analysis, all this stuff. Nobody is paying these people. I mean, I think to do so much of this work, nobody's cutting you a check to be thinking about this right this second. And, you know, for me, more or less the same thing. What I've noticed is I feel like there is a call to service that has been issued and people are responding. And that gives me the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very much connected to that same story about community. At the end of the day, service is what you need. Like a call to service is that in giving you receive. And the truly terrible feeling of doing something to get paid, exclusively to do it to get paid, to prostitute yourself, to be able to make ends meet, or even worse, not to make ends meet, to get a slightly fancier car than you used to have.
Yeah.
The antidote to that is service, and people are being called into it. And as they wake up into that and they realize, oh my God, that's what I've been yearning for. That is the process that also begins to solve the meaning crisis.
Right. Right, which we didn't really get to here as well. But I, for one, have found, as I was thinking about actually, I have been placed in positions of service my whole life, and I wasn't even really aware of what was happening to me. When I was a child, I did a number of these outward bound adventures, right? And one of the pillars of their whole ethos is service. right? I've been involved in other communities where the whole concept is service. I ran charter schools in the city of District of Columbia. They paid me, but it was also service, right? We're also helping people. One of the fundamental tenets of the liminal order is service to our family, service to our communities, to each other, to your brothers. And also we've turned it around and actually done service for the country as well in our own small ways. We've coordinated national service stuff. In my world, this is a trend that's growing. Is this a trend that's growing in your world? Is this a trend that how and if so, how do we foster it to continue to grow once this Kairos moment, this moment of crisis opportunity has passed us? How do we continue to foster this sense of service? Because these are the connections and the meaning that we're many of us are really lacking in our life today.
That's a really good question. Let's see. Well, I think a big part of it, to be perfectly frank, is to demoralize the distractions.
Interesting.
And I really hope that people actually get past that. Like that's really the opportunity, right? The opportunity right now for a lot of people is either to turn on Netflix and watch a bunch of junk for a lot, or to actually try to find a way to be of service. And you're going to be working telecommuting, and you're going to find out pretty quickly it's about an hour a day. It's about much work you're actually really doing. And that's a lot of time you got left over that you could do something with. And you're either going to be entertaining yourself, which is to say numbing yourself, on occasion doing something cool. And I mean, I don't need to hammer those poor guys that try really hard, and some of the stories are amazing. But to demoralize the distractions and to just, I mean, come on. I tell my daughters that boredom is the mother of creativity. And there's just a naturalness to this. It's getting back on track. I think it's really getting back on track. This is not about trying to like invent something new or to push people. It's just getting people back on track and helping them not get pulled off track. This is more of a moment of clarity leading to sobriety than it is trying to turn people into something they never were.
Interesting reference there to 12-step and addiction stuff, because service there too is one of the primary solutions to that problem.
Yes, you're right. And there's probably something pretty darn deep there.
There really is. There really is. I mean, if you haven't done it, it's hard to describe. But if you do take the time and energy to put it into someone else and something else, it does come back. X, 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x, whatever it is.
Yeah, it is hard to describe. You have to, yeah. It's a disposition, isn't it? It's a disposition to be able to allow that coming back to come. Right? If you're holding tight, right? If you're trying to control the situation and make damn sure it comes back, then it won't. And it's not service then. But if you actually are able to allow yourself to allow and to be curious in many ways, like, I wonder what is happening here. And then, but you will look back and you will, at least in my experience, for a long time now, I will look back and say, wow, yep, that was paid back 1,000-fold.
It really was. And if we can find a way to coordinate this and draw it out of people on a much larger scale, which, I think we're seeing, which is just, you tell me these stories about the people that are putting in all this work, and I see the work that other people are putting in. We're all sort of drawn to this at this moment right now, because I think we're all collectively feeling the instability and collectively feeling this. There is a call to service, and people are responding currently. And I really hope that we're able to carry this forward after the dust settles here, or the new structures are built, or whatever is going to come out of this in the next few years, and that we can continue to grow that sense across the country and the world, really. And that's sort of what I'm doing every day, and it's incredibly rewarding for me, and I know it's rewarding for you as well. This really seems like a good place to sort of wrap a little bit. Do you have any other pressing, burning things that you're working on or thinking about, or do you feel like prognosticating a little bit for the next few months, or anything you might want to leave us with? Because I feel like I'm in a good place. I'm feeling really centered actually now, whereas the last few days for sure have been just madness.
Yeah, I'm actually feeling pretty centered too. I mean, we could go on forever. There's a lot going on, and
Yeah.
this is a very weird feeling, isn't it? It's a feeling where I was telling my dad this the other day. When you're walking in the ocean, you can see the wave coming, and it hasn't hit you yet, but you can see it. And when it hits you, you can feel it. And this is one of these things that doesn't have those characteristics. You have these little moments where things pop through, where you're like, oh, wow, the grocery store shelves are in fact stripped bare, which is something happens, like something in the world physical happened. But this wave is coming. There is a wave that is coming. There's an exponentially expanding virus that is coming. There is a fiscal crisis that is coming. But it's not the kind of thing that we're good at feeling. And that's quite disorienting. It's a bizarre feeling from my experience. I can find myself in the thick of it, like I think I did 10 hours straight of just one call after another call after another call after another call. And then I took off my shoes and I took my 16-month-old daughter and walked in the spring flowers. And there's nobody around. And I was like, whoa, I don't even, what is going on? Like, what world am I in right now? How does this happen? How is it possible that simultaneously we can be at war and peace? But, all right. Well, I think maybe we wrap
That's
it
where
up.
we are. That's where we are. We're simultaneously at war and at peace. And I was going to ask actually on the way out, like, what are you doing personally as a way to deal with the chaos around us right now? But I think you summed it up best with that. Take some time with your family, get outside, put your feet in the grass, look at the sky, smell the flowers, re-engage with nature, find that peace that is actually right there at home with you, even though all around the world, everywhere right now, total chaos, madness.
Yeah.
But even those people in Italy, they're finding ways to come together and to be centered and singing on the balconies. I've seen videos of Spanish people or a guy in Spain leading calisthenics from the rooftop of his building. It was like a little bit lower of a roof, and all these other buildings on their balconies all around them, people joining him in like this group exercise program. It's those little acts of kindness and humanity are ways that we can solve for this problem of how to deal with all this nonsense that's everywhere. So, Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it. I know that you've been on the go and you're in demand, and so thank you again for taking the time. There's a million things else that we can talk to, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime soon. And I just really appreciate it, and thank you very much, and thank you for everything that you're doing. And carry on, and I hope that your wife and your kids are good, and that you're going to have a good time hunkered down wherever you are in a different time zone than usual these days. So thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Jack. And, blessings to you and take care.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jordan. Bye-bye.